We will start this session with a contribution from Eli Ayash, who will be talking about the debates between the proponents of the market models and the so-called GATS model or the rough volatility model, each of which leads to the two distinct series of truths within the logic of the market. Eli, please take it away.
Hello, thank you, Mo, thank you, everyone. I will start by sharing my screen. Okay, I think it's here. Can you all see it?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So as Mohammed has said, yes, I'm a specialist in derivatives pricing theory, and I used to be an option trader myself. So I will speak to you today about the latest in the modeling of the financial market. So how to model the behavior of assets, and with a twist that will come from derivatives, which I'll show you in the end. However, I will start by contrasting 2 points of view, and I'm sure the first one is very familiar to all philosophers of science. That's God's point of view. So the belief here is that there is some truth out there, and the mathematical model or the theoretical model is pursuing that truth, and eventually it will reach it. Maybe not in our lifetime, but in ideal end of inquiry, we will find that truth. And by the way, I will show you later that some of the researchers in finance today think that they have found the last truth, and really God's model is what they call this model that they have found, which I will explain later. This view I contrast with the market model view, where we do not rise above the market and remain immersed in it. We don't leave the surface of the market. So in other words, I'm contrasting two things. The model of the market, where the market is seen as an external object which we can model, versus the market model, where the market is more of a medium that we continue traveling inside which, and we never arrive actually at destination. So market model in the second sense is models that are usable in the market. It's the same as saying a road bike. So it's not that the bike is the model of the road, it's use the bike to ride the road. I, for one, have always thought that the market is a medium rather than an object. I have called it the market, the medium of contingency, or to be more specific, the medium of the prices of contingent claims. And I have written this book to expound this point of view. And where by medium, I do not just mean the channel or the way that you communicate a message, but also an intervening substance as air, through which a force acts or an effect is produced. So the same word as milieu in French. So for me, the market is going to be a medium inside which you are always immersed and cannot rise above it. So let me first discuss the first point of view, which is where the market is a detached object, and we are looking at the mathematical model of the market. So of course, if we look at the market from outside the market as an object, the model in question has to be a statistical model, because all we see is the market as a generator of random numbers, which are prices, and all we observe are time series of prices, and we cannot look at the causes, because there is an infinity of causes causing the movement of the stock exchange, all happening in an infinitesimal time interval, as Bachelier has already argued as early as 1900, as a result of which you can only do statistics, and you can only model the stochastic processes of the traded asset prices. So you have to resort to probability and model a stochastic process. And of course, the simplest of which is Brownian motion, which was already proposed by Bachelier as early as 1900. So that's a picture of Brownian motion. I'm sure you're all familiar with these kinds of graphs. So it looks as if there's a lot happening here. However, this is Brownian motion with constant volatility sigma. Volatility is the parameter, the key parameter, which measures the randomness of the path. Here I'm showing you typically the path in time of a traded asset such as the S&P or the Euro stocks. So that's Brownian motion with constant volatility sigma, which is the simplest stochastic, continuous time stochastic process that you can think of. So that was the situation until 1973, when Black-Scholes-Merton get hold of the Brownian motion model and devised their famous Black-Scholes model, which gave us the pricing, or rather the valuation of options. So here you have the famous Black-Scholes formula, which is based on Brownian motion, and this is the graphical representation of the formula. So what we are giving here is reading the value of call option. So options, call options and put options are the simplest of derivatives. So that's the formula that allowed the market makers from 1973 to value the options. And this is what really made the markets of options explode. And we are valuing the option as a function of the underlying asset price. So if this is an option on the S&P, the underlying asset price would be the price of the S&P, which I showed you earlier. And this formula gives us the value of the derivative, the value of the option. So here in this formula, it is the stock price or the underlying equity price or the index is the variable. And sigma here is just a fixed parameter. And mind you, it's a single parameter, which is constant. And K and T are specific to the option that we are pricing. So the important thing to have in mind here is that a single number that you feed, a single parameter that you feed into a single formula will give me the value of all options of different strikes and maturities, and there are thousands of them that are trading. So this was the situation until the October 1987 crash, which is, by the way, was the month when I personally started trading in the market. So I started as a trader in the midst of the October crash. And the October crash completely invalidated the Black-Scholes model. So the Black-Scholes theory, according to which a single number sigma explains the values of all options, went wrong. And this is the situation that is prevailing since then until today, where you have here 1,000 options that I'm showing you. Each vertical blue bar represents the price of a different option. And you can see that the blue bars are not at all lying on the same level, because each level is the volatility number that I should be using in the Black-Scholes formula to get the price of that option. So if the Black-Scholes theory was correct, I would have a flat surface, whereas in reality, every single option is being priced using a Black-Scholes formula with a different number than its neighbor. So this is a situation. And of course, the Black-Scholes model failed for this reason. This is the same view which I'm rotating. So that's the situation of the options market today. So of course, after 1987, people who deal with models in finance want to price option had to find something better or more sophisticated than Black-Scholes. So the mathematical model that followed the crash are the following. Of course, volatility sigma could no longer be constant as in Black-Scholes. So the first idea was to make it stochastic itself. So meaning now the parameter which was constant itself is going to admit of a stochastic process like Brownian motion, right? And these kinds of model worked, but did not quite work. And finally, today, they found that volatility was not going to only be stochastic, but follows something that we call a rough volatility process, which is even worse than Brownian motion that I showed you earlier. It's actually something that we call multi-fractional Brownian motion for volatility. And this is God's model that people nowadays, it happened last year, think they have finally found. And this is what the process for volatility looks like. So of course, volatility is not constant as in Black-Scholes. And you can see that the rough volatility process, which is not Brownian motion, but something more complex and much uglier than Brownian motion, looks like this. It's much, much rougher than Brownian motion. That's why it's called rough volatility. So why is it God's model? Because those people who found this model in the last 5 years, they remember I told you we should not look inside the market because there was an infinity of causes and the mechanism of the market was too complex to look inside. They did look inside and they theorized the internal mechanics of the market. So they looked into the microstructure of the market and they came with a theory whose conclusion was that yes, volatility was going to follow the rough volatility process for one thing. So there's this theoretical part. Then they looked at empirical time series of the instantaneous volatility itself of the underlying. And nowadays you can estimate the instantaneous volatility of assets because of high frequency trading. Volatility is a statistical number, but because we have so many price data happening in a millisecond, we can estimate something as instantaneous volatility. And it turns out that empirically, they both lend support to the rough volatility model of the underlying asset price that these people think they have found. And that's why they thought they were vindicated in finding finally the truth. Not only that, but additionally, I mean, they could have stopped at this point if really the purpose was to model the behavior of the S&P, say, or to model the behavior of an underlying share. But you know, not only that, but there are derivatives. So there are also derivatives trading in the market, as I showed you earlier, thousands of them. So not only that, because as soon as you now bring financial theory and derivative valuation theory to bear, you find that, and you apply the fundamental theorem of arbitrage, you find that an underlying stochastic structure of any kind, like the one that they think is the ultimate one, the volatility, imposes algorithmically the value of derivatives, and we compute them as mathematical expectations. So the last thing they needed to check was to see whether the values of options that are predicted by their God's model is vindicated by the market. And to crown it all, they found that yes, the empirical option price surface, such as the one I showed you earlier of the 1,000 option, also confirmed God's model. That's why they are all convinced that it is the true model. And here is a citation by one of the most prominent researcher in this area. He said, Jim Gatherell, he said, I knew it had to be correct. I started to call fractional Brownian motion God's model. And this is a citation from a Risk magazine, February of last year. And he continues, I believe that rough volatility is the true model. That's another citation. So you see here that everything has converged. And by the way, this answers Donald McKenzie's question, who is a famous sociologist of finance, who was wondering what model has the options market been enacting since the 1987 crash, because he wrote a famous book where he said that from 1973 until 1987, the market options, the market of options seemed to confirm the Black-Scholes model until the crash. So what is the model that is enacted after the crash? And apparently it seems that the answer has to be the volatility model. But there is one big problem, is that if you ask from the option market an independent confirmation of your model, that means that the option market is independent. And if it's independent, it means that options have to independently trade, because the market is the medium of their prices too. So the options cannot but just be valuations rising above the market, theoretical valuation. They have themselves to become prices immersed in the very same medium as the underlying asset. So that's why there's the surface of the market that we can never leave. And that's why actually the other view, which is the one where we never leave the surface and never take a sky hook point of view on the market, which is the market model, is one where we have to consider now that the options are traded by themselves, their market is given by itself, and they have to model the option prices processes directly. So I have to model now 1,000 different processes for each of the 1,000 options that I showed you in the image earlier. Options become new underliers. And if I want to write stochastic processes for each and single option price, I have to consider now second level volatility parameters, because those processes of option prices have themselves to have volatility parameters, their own Brownian motions or the like, or maybe their own graph volatility levels. But this becomes a real problem, because this pushes the problem one level up, so on and so forth. Why? Because if options now become tradables and I'm writing processes for them, I can now write options on the options, and I fall in the same problem as before, because my new algorithm will impose values for the new options that I've written on the options, and in turn those second level derivatives have to be traded in the market, and therefore their prices will become independent of my model and will always escape the model. I told you in the medium we never stop, we always travel. I cannot stop at the final destination and think that I have reached the truth. So the conclusion is that if I push that argument to the limit, where I keep writing options on options, at no point there will be a stable and final underlying stochastic structure on which to rely. All the volatility parameters that I have at any stage systematically become tradables themselves, because they become tradables as soon as options and derivatives of next generation come into play. Yet it's not chaos. Many times I have been read by people who think that when I say that the market is the medium of contingency, as if I was saying that anything goes. It's not true, it's not chaos. I have still to enforce the principle of non-arbitrage. So there need to be some mathematical structure underlying all this. That's why we need a superior concept to a model. And this concept is, in the last article that I wrote in the Williams magazine, is what we call the pricing function. And this pricing function is associated with the market models. It is a superior concept to a valuation function. to think of a mathematical function as something that yields value. We always say that we value a function, even in mathematics. Here is something where we don't value a function, we price it in a way. And the pricing function, why is it different? And it's not an ordinary kind of function, because as I showed, probability and prevision are backward. If you think of probability and think of prevision and think of any algorithm, really, you are always going to project the future as fixed and look at the future from today. So it's backward because you are looking on the future from today. Whereas the pricing function, I cannot develop here the full argument, is looking forward. I prefer to say that it writes the market, it writes the future instead of predict the market. It is a function only, if you will, with underlying variables and no parameters. Why? Because any parameter, any volatility parameter will eventually become a tradable itself and become a price, therefore become an underlying variable of the pricing function. This function, as a consequence, cannot be written. Only a model can be written, but this function is superior, it cannot be written. No particular model is ever instantiated underneath this function. You can think of it as a kind of deep learning kind of device, as if the market is a deep learning machine that doesn't give me the ultimate function that it has, only learning from the future, not from the past. That's the twist that we have, because derivatives are always forward-looking and not backward-looking. Thank you.
Do you think we have time for a question? Batislav, do you have a question? I guess that's the question.
Yes, I had a small question.
Go ahead.
So should we consider this parameter of volatility as a sort of parameter of God to master the contingency as such?
Yes.
So like a parameter which would help us to orient ourselves in the middle of the event, something like that.
Exactly. I mean, the parameters of the processes are just parameters of probability distribution. It's the same thing to speak of volatility or to speak of a probability model. So as soon as you model anything probabilistically, as soon as you want to train any trading algorithm to trade the market, you have to model something probabilistically for the algorithm to take hold of, for the decision tree to take hold of. So you have to rely on some parameter of some kind. So all the logic of algorithms are based on this schema, where you have to have some parameters. Of course, it can be adaptive and the algorithm can itself learn from itself, but yet it has to have parameters that rule the way it behaves. And all I'm saying is that the market is a superior kind of calculator, if you will, where the parameters, no matter how complex and how high level they are, they can immediately translate into a derivative. And this derivative, as soon as it is immersed in the market, because the postulate is that we never leave the medium of the market, will break the parameter, because it will make the parameter which you wanted to be fixed, it will make it stochastic again, because it becomes a price. So yes, we try the hardest that we can to crystallize things in a probabilistic view, but the market always breaks it. So people think it's an accident that eventually will come to an end and I will find the truth behind the market, where I think that no, it's a postulate that you should never find it, because it's a continuous medium and the perpetual medium of contingency. Therefore, contingency will always be superior to any probability projection.